in a deep dive into Han Kang's human acts. We're really going to try to unpack this novel and how powerfully it explores the impact of the Kwangju Uprising, using firsthand accounts and, historical context, literary analysis, that whole bit.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about this book is how it takes these individual stories, these really personal experiences, and kind of weaves them into this huge historical event, this pivotal moment in South Korean history. And I think what makes it so powerful is it's not just like a dry, historical account. It's a very visceral, very emotional journey into trauma and memory.
Definitely. And I think it's important for listeners to really grasp the context here. The Kwangju Uprising, and so those who might not be familiar, was a student-led pro-democracy movement that was brutally suppressed by the South Korean military in May of 1980. And it's not something that's just stayed in the past. It still resonates really deeply in South Korea today. It symbolizes this struggle for democracy, but also the wounds left behind by state violence.
Absolutely. And Han Kang, being a Gwangju native herself, she doesn't shy away from the rawness of those wounds. She doesn't sugarcoat anything. She confronts that brutality head on in a way that forces the reader to confront the horrors that unfolded there.
And she does this through the eyes of multiple characters, right? Each character offering a different perspective on the uprising and its aftermath.
Yeah.
Like take Dong-ho, for example. He's a young boy who's suddenly thrust into the middle of this violence.
Yeah. Dong-ho's story is particularly poignant, I think. I mean, imagine being that young and witnessing the death of your friend and then finding a sense of purpose in caring for the bodies of other victims. It speaks to the incredible resilience of the human spirit, even when faced with this unimaginable tragedy.
It's one of those things that manages to be heartbreaking and strangely life-affirming at the same time. There's this one scene that always gets me where Dong-ho is struggling with the singing of the national anthem at the funerals. And it's meant to be this tribute to the dead, right? But for him, it raises this really jarring question. How can he bring himself to sing the anthem of a nation that just murdered its own people?
Yeah, that little detail, it seems so small, but it carries so much weight. It really underscores the complexities of things like patriotism and loyalty and identity, all these themes that Han Kang weaves so masterfully throughout the novel. And I think as a reader, you really have to ask yourself, how does this challenge the way we usually think about these concepts? How does it complicate things?
Exactly. And as if Dong-ho's story wasn't compelling enough on its own, Han Kang takes us on another journey, this time with his soul. So now he's separated from his body and he's wandering through the city's aftermath, desperately searching for his sister's soul.
It's such a haunting and evocative way to portray the spiritual and emotional fallout of the uprising, because she isn't just dealing with physical death here, but the loss of innocence, the shattering of faith in humanity itself.
It's that layering of experiences, right?
Yeah.
This tapestry of voices that makes human acts so impactful. And we don't just stay with Dong-ho's perspective. We move on to the stories of factory workers like Yoon-suk and Jung-mi, who are fighting for labor rights in the midst of all this larger political upheaval.
And it's important to remember their struggle wasn't happening in a vacuum. It really speaks to a significant societal issue in South Korea at the time, which was the exploitation of workers, particularly women. So their fight for basic rights becomes this kind of microcosm of the larger struggle for democracy and justice that fueled the entire Kwangju Uprising.
It's a really stark reminder that these historical events, they don't just stay confined to textbooks. They have this ripple effect that impacts everyday people, their lives, their fight for dignity.
It's like she's taken all these different pieces, these glimpses into lives that were touched by this event, and she's created this incredibly complex and moving tapestry, And each piece, each voice offers us a different lens through which we can try to understand the Kwangju Uprising and what it meant for South Korea.
It's like she's piecing together this shattered mirror.
Right.
Each fragment shows us a different angle, a different emotional response.
Yeah.
But none of them on their own can fully capture the enormity of what happened.
Precisely. And that's not by accident. You see this fragmented structure. It's not just some stylistic choice. It forces us as readers to confront the limitations of memory itself. The fact that we can never truly grasp the totality of an experience like this.
And even with that, she never lets us forget the brutality of it all, right? Even amidst these nuanced explorations of memory and trauma, there's unflinchingly raw portrayal of the violence.
Absolutely. She doesn't shy away from it at all, and her descriptions are so vivid, so visceral at times, they're really hard to read. But they never feel gratuitous. There's this rawness to her prose that demands that you bear witness to what happened to the horrors that humans are capable of inflicting on one another.
There's this one detail that just sent chills down my spine when I read it. It's almost chilling in its simplicity. The soldiers, when they were preparing for the massacre, they purchased 2 bullets per person in advance.
It's horrifying, isn't it? And it underscores the fact that this wasn't some chaotic outpouring of violence. This was calculated. This was the state acting to repress its own people in the most brutal way imaginable.
And yet, even in the midst of all this darkness, Han Kang still manages to offer these glimmers of hope, these moments of human connection that shine through the cracks. It's almost as if she's reminding us that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit has this incredible capacity for resilience.
Human acts isn't just an indictment of cruelty. It's a testament to the power of the human spirit. For every act of barbarity that she depicts, we also see acts of kindness, these small gestures of empathy that remind us of our shared humanity.
Like that scene in the courtroom where the prisoners, even after everything they've endured, they find this moment of solace in singing the national anthem together.
Exactly. Even when they've been stripped of their freedom, their dignity, when they're facing unimaginable circumstances, they find strength in their shared experience. It speaks to the enduring power of hope, even in the face of the most profound adversity.
And it's not just the big moments like that. It's those smaller acts of compassion that are equally impactful. You know, the story of the imprisoned factory worker who finds comfort in the simple act of care from a cellmate.
Those are the moments that stay with you long after you finish the book. They remind us that even when surrounded by suffering, the human spirit finds ways to endure, to connect, to even find moments of beauty and grace.
You know, I keep thinking about that recurring motif of glass in the novel. It feels so symbolic. I wonder if you could talk a bit about how that ties into this theme of resilience.
The glass, yes. It's such a potent image. On the one hand, it represents fragility, the ease with which something so beautiful can be shattered. But it also represents transparency, clarity. Even when it's broken, we can still see through it, can't we?
It's like the characters, and maybe South Korea as a whole, are being forced to confront these fragmented reflections of themselves, these uncomfortable truths.
Exactly. And it's through that process of confronting those broken pieces, of acknowledging the pain and the damage, that there's potential for healing, for piecing those fragments back together in a way that honors the past, but also allows for growth, for renewal.
Which makes me think about the title Human Acts. It feels like both a statement and a challenge at the same time.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
It absolutely is both. On the one hand, it acknowledges the capacity for great cruelty, for the kind of calculated brutality that we see during the Kwangju Uprising. But it also recognizes the potential for incredible compassion, for those small acts of kindness, those flickers of hope amidst the darkness. It's a reminder that we are capable of both.
That we have a choice in how we respond to the darkness around us.
Precisely. And maybe it's in those choices, in those small acts of human connection, that we find a way forward, a way to heal the wounds of the past and build a more just and compassionate future.
And it strikes me that this book, Human Acts, it's not just about these individual choices. It's also challenging the official narrative of what happened in Kwangju. The one that tried to sweep it under the rug, pretend it didn't happen the way it did.
Absolutely. It's an act of resistance against that silencing Han Kang, giving voice to the survivors, the ones who lived through the Kwangju Uprising. And in doing so, she confronts those attempts to bury the truth, to just pretend it wasn't as bad as it was.
There's that section with the researcher conducting a psychological autopsy on the victims. Kind of a chilling phrase when you think about it, but it's also incredibly powerful.
It really is. And it makes you think about the long-term impact of trauma, the way that events like this, they don't just end when the violence stops. The scars run much deeper than that.
It makes you think about the responsibility we all have to bear witness to these stories, to make sure they're heard and acknowledged, to learn from them so that history doesn't just keep repeating itself.
That's what literature like this can do. It's not passive human acts. It's an invitation to engage with these really difficult questions, to confront the darkness of the past, and try to find some meaning, some understanding in the aftermath.
So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive here, what are some of the key takeaways you hope our listeners are left grappling with? What's that feeling that lingers after you close the book?
That's the thing about this novel. It doesn't give you easy answers. It doesn't tie everything up in a neat little bow. Han Kang leaves us with these lingering questions about memory truth, the very nature of reconciliation. Can we ever truly understand something like this just through individual stories? And how do we as a society even begin to reconcile these conflicting narratives and find a way to move forward with justice?
And those aren't just hypothetical questions, are they? They're incredibly relevant to the world we're living in right now. You see echoes of Kwangju and conflicts that are happening all over the world. In the fight for social justice, the suppression of truth, attempts to silence dissent.
It's everywhere. In human acts, it serves as this stark reminder that we're capable of both immense cruelty and incredible resilience. It's a call to action, really, a challenge to confront injustice, to never forget the past, and to constantly strive for a future where these kinds of horrors aren't repeated.
Well said. What a powerful and I think really necessary conversation about Han Kang's human acts and the Kwangju Uprising. We hope this deep dive has given you, our listeners, a new understanding of this really important piece of literature and maybe even inspired you to check it out for yourselves. And to leave you with Han Kang's own words, it was only when we were shattered that we proved we had souls, that what we really were was humans made of glass. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep seeking out those glimmers of hope even in the darkest of times.